Well, hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be in Idaho. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I have to give a shout out to all the AAUW Idaho members who made it possible for me to be here. From Kitty Geidel giving me the miles to fly, right? To Kathy and Julie having the idea to begin with and nail me down about a year ago to make it all happen. There's a great team of AAUW members here in Idaho, and I'm just so proud to be part of it and to be with you tonight. So I am going to talk about advocacy, and I may have to tell the story about the Great Bathroom Door Revolt. The reason why I want to tell that story, and my apologies to the people here who've heard it, is it's a great example of advocacy. At a young age, sure, but it's a great example of kind of personal power, but also the power of trying to make change in groups, right? Because we do know that one person can change the world. We see it all the time. But I also think that it's so much more fun to do it in groups, right? And this is a great example of that. So to do that, I have to take you back to my hometown. I'm from a small town outside of Cleveland called Hinckley, Ohio. Has anybody heard of Hinckley, Ohio? Yeah? Anybody in here heard of the Hinckley Buzzards? Oh, maybe. Yeah, she has. See, there's always one. Anyway, this is a small town outside of Cleveland, and I'll take you back to essentially the Rust Belt days of the 70s when I was in elementary school. Great school, but it was crumbling around us. Great teachers, but the facilities just weren't there. And one of the most obvious ways, now you got to put on your 8-year-old girl hat to see why this might be an issue, and I'm confident the men in the room can put on their 8-year-old girl hats too. One of the things that was going on was that we did not have doors on the bathroom stalls. Now, that might not seem like a big deal. We kind of took it as a matter of course. They'd fallen off and literally had not been repaired. So we would kind of go to the restroom in groups and take care of business that way. And I'm convinced that's where we learned as girls that as women we should all go to the restroom together. But one of the things that happened somehow was that I think we were at lunch or maybe in gym, and we found out that the boys had doors on their bathroom stalls. And I'm not sure that I made a gender tie-in right away, but I certainly had a practicality issue with that. And I decided I was going to go talk to the principal and ask him about this issue. Now, I have to tell you, I was that little kid, maybe a little bit of a brown nose. The secretary of the elementary school lived 2 doors down from me. We all know the secretary of the elementary school runs the world. So I kind of had my finger on the pulse of Hinckley Elementary. And I was good friends with the principal, whose name was Mr. Ginke. Mr. Ginke, of course, is the best elementary school principal name ever. And I decided I was going to go talk to Mr. Ginke and say, we'd like to have some doors. So I just went into his office, open door policy. Mr. Ginke, here's the scoop. The boys have doors. We don't. Can we get some doors? It was really just as simple as that. Friday afternoon. And he literally patted me on the head and said, oh, Lisa, we've got so many problems. This is the least of our concerns. And I remember leaving the office and thinking this was such a different conversation than I usually had with Mr. Ginke. He was always the pal, the friend, and so on and so forth. And feeling not so great about that interaction, right? I mean, in 8-year-old vernacular, it was icky, right? And so I went home, thought about it over the weekend. What am I going to do? Is there anything I can do? Does this even really matter? What's the point? And I thought about it long and hard, and I came back on Monday, and I started a petition. And I started a petition that said, we want doors on the bathroom stalls for the girls' restrooms, 3rd and 4th grade. And I went to my best friends and said, I need you to sign this petition. And it was really hard work to get them on this petition because they knew it was going to the principal. And they were afraid they were going to get in trouble, right? You think about anyone stepping forward, taking the risk to be first is a big deal. But I employed my burgeoning lobbying skills. There may have been some Smarties and Hello Kitty kind of paraphernalia involved in terms of some trades. But I was able to get the first 10 or 15 on the petition, and that made all the difference. So when you think about advocacy, we always know it's harder to be the first, but once you get a few, once you get a critical mass, you can move forward. By the end of the week, the boys were signing the petition. It was cool to sign the petition. I had 200 folks on this petition. And I tell you, I wish I still had this petition. This petition was Smithsonian worthy. I mean, it was pulled out of a notebook, and it was raggedy on the edges, and there were flowered hearts, and as I said, some Hello Kitty stickers, because we dressed it up for Mr. Ginky. And I can remember going in that same week later, Friday afternoon, with my petition, and being very nervous, of course. I still actually get kind of goosebumps when I think about it, because it's one of those times, and we've all had them in our life, where you can just remember everything. What you had on, smells, what the weather was like, who was there. And this is one of those times for me. And I remember taking that little raggedy, girly petition, putting it on his desk, and literally just saying this: Mr. Ginky, I'm not the only one who wants doors. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering, how did Mr. Ginky respond to me saying that? And as I've grown up, I really realized that the response I got from him was that awkward combination of pride and frustration. Like, I think he was proud of me for doing it, for kind of standing up, but boy, it was just one more thing on his plate that he didn't know what he was going to deal with, right? So I will tell you, 2 weeks later, we had doors. Okay, come on, that's cool. But I have to tell you the rest of the story, because here's where it gets interesting. As AUW's chief policy representative, I go to the political conventions every year. And that particular year, I was at the Republican convention in New York City, and I was telling that story to a group of young women that Lifetime Television had brought in to kind of experience the political process. And Lifetime Television decided they liked that story so much, they included me in a book. And it was called Secrets of Powerful Women. And so now, like I said, the Great Bathroom Door Revolt is now, there was a review in Christian Science Monitor, and I thought of all the things I could talk about in the Christian Science Monitor. But here's what's interesting, and I did not find out this rest of the story, that Paul Harvey rest of the story, until after the book was published. Now, as you can imagine, my mother was over the moon, very excited about this. Now, the thing of it is, I didn't know Mom actually knew that I did it. So here I am, how many decades later, having to kind of break the news to Mom that I kind of did a petition with the principal when I was a kid. Turns out she knew all about it. Because here's what happened. My mother's the best PR agent in the world, by the way. So what she did actually was find Mr. Ginky, who is 283 years old, and happily living in Medina, Ohio. She found Mrs. Cosman, the school secretary who'd been our neighbor, and got them together for lunch. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this could be good. This could be bad. So they sit down, and they're excited about the book. I sign it out, feeling like real special that I'm an author signing a book. And it turns out that immediately after he got the petition, he put it down and he called my mother. Now, my mother was president of the PTA. They were pals. They kind of knew each other. But he called her and he said, Diane, what have you put her up to this time? This is what he said. So now you're all wondering, where did I learn how to do petitions? What have you put her up to this time? And she was like, Roy, Mr. Ginky's name was Roy, Roy, I don't know what you're talking about. So Mr. Ginky explains the petition, the doors. And he's like, you know the financial situation. We're in a crunch. I don't know what we're going to do. What am I going to do with this? And she said, well, Roy, I guess you're getting some doors. Now, what was great about that, and again, I didn't find out till decades later, here was woman number one who had my back. I would love the idea of just my petition alone having made that change. But it might not have, had she not stepped up and not let him off the hook and not kind of dumbed down the action that we had taken, being our own best advocates. So he hangs up with her, and he goes out to talk to Mrs. Cosman. And he says, Mrs. Cosman, have you seen this? And of course, Mrs. Cosman knew when I started the petition, because she's the secretary and knows everything. But he said, have you seen this? And he put it on her desk, and she said, oh yeah, there's more than 200 names on there, Roy. And he's like, what am I supposed to do with this? And she said, Roy, I've been telling you to put doors on those stalls for 6 months. Very powerful woman number two, who had my back. I didn't know about these ongoing stories until this book came out. And how cool is that, to find that out? And Mr. Ginke, I think, was a little concerned about what my portrayal of him might be in the story, but it was all good. He ended up being very happy with it. But think about, from a kid's perspective, really from anybody's perspective, what a powerful lesson that was to learn so young, right? I went in and asked for something that I thought was right and just and appropriate to the powers that be, followed protocol, did all the things you're supposed to do. And not only did I not get what I wanted, I got disrespected. I felt bad about that interaction. I was dismissed. I went in there just a week later with 200 of my best friends at my back, and 2 very important best friends also at my back, in my mom and Mrs. Cosman, and got exactly what I wanted, and pretty darn quick. That's the power of advocacy. You're always going to have the instigator, what Labor Secretary Perez likes to call the serial advocates. The serial advocates. You're always going to have that person, but part of it is, are they able to encourage other people to come along? And the thing that I like about advocacy and what is so important is that you can be both. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm not going to get involved in advocacy or with a group or whatever because I don't have the time. The reality is, you can spend the time that you want. It can be a little bit or it can be a lot. But there's always room for your voice somehow. And your voice, your contribution is always going to be valuable in some way. My brother or my sister, my mother and my entire family was on the petition. No, I'm just kidding. My mother and Mrs. Cosman only dealt with those bathroom doors once. One conversation. And it made such a big difference, right? So for me, as I said, advocacy is very important in terms of how we do things independently, but it's also hugely important in terms of how we function in groups. So with that story, let me give you just a quick definition and see if you think what I just described to you fits this particular definition of advocacy. Advocacy is the activity by an individual or a group which aims to influence decisions within political, economic, and social systems and institutions. Sounds like advocacy, isn't it? Now, here's the thing I'm going to tell you. You're all advocates. In fact, you are all actually very good lobbyists. I'm a lobbyist. I use my powers for good, I swear. You're all very good lobbyists. Let me see a show of hands on a few things. How many people in here have ever done have a persuasive conversation with your spouse about what movie you're going to go to? Mm-hmm. How many people in here have had a persuasive conversation with your kid about bedtime? Right? The thing about lobbying, the thing about being an advocate, is that we all have these natural skills. We all have opinions and things that we would like to see done. The key is, what are the tools that we use to get there, right? And sometimes people think advocacy has to be this big, scary thing in the marble halls of Congress, and the reality is we advocate for issues every day of our life. You coming here tonight was a great example of advocacy because you want to hear about it and you want to have great dinner conversation with wonderful people at a great event. That in and of itself is advocacy. How many people in here have ever had a conversation with a doctor about what your options were for a particular health treatment or concern? Think about how important your advocacy was right there. The thing that's interesting about that is that in that instance, you were your own best advocate. So often when we advocate, we're advocating for others. Women in particular, when we talk about kind of social movements and kind of what we advocate for, women have a reputation of being fairly selfless, giving all for their family, right? Sacrificing for their family so that their kids and their spouse and really their whole extended family, their community, can be the best that they can have and have the best life experience possible, right? For me, I was laughing. I knew I was home at Julie's house when I saw a little sign that said, "I work hard so my dog can have a better life." But really, when we talk about women's advocacy, we work hard, and oftentimes they're on issues for everybody else, right? It's for kids. It's for the environment. It's for people who need health care. It's for whatever it might be. Girl Scouts, the Rape Crisis Line, any of that, the Chamber of Commerce. We work hard for other. And the thing that I like about AUW is that we've figured out that when we work hard for women and families, we help everybody. We raise all boats. And there's nothing selfish in that. That self-advocacy is where, in many respects, you can be the most powerful. So, for instance, I just told you my bathroom door story. Took up, however many minutes to tell you that story. But it's a powerful story that will stick in your brain. You each have a powerful story about issues that you care about. And when you can personalize it, when you can say, not only here's what I care about, but here's why. AUW has been around for, at this point, almost 135 years. We know just a little bit about persistence, right? AUW members, we first started in Boston. I like to call us the original uppity women, right? Because these were women getting college degrees when that was not what women did in 1881. And they not only got those college degrees, but they decided, it might be nice if other women could get college degrees. It might be nice if they could use that degree in the workforce if they so chose, or for the betterment of their communities and their families. And we ran into a roadblock where people were saying, oh, you educate women, boy, their reproductive organs will shrink. They won't be able to have kids. And so what did AUW members do? They became their own best self-advocates. They did research on themselves. At that point, more than 1,000 members across the country. And they were being fruitful and multiplying quite well, thank you very much. So they were able to dismiss that myth, but took that unusual step of being their own best self-advocate. And that's what I always think is something that we miss sometimes in advocacy. It feels like it's for others, but it's really for us too. And when we have that energy behind it, it becomes that much more personal. We stick the course, we become that much more persistent, right? When you think about, for instance, how long AUW has been working on the equal pay issue. We gave our first report to the federal government about our concerns about how they've been ranking men and women in the federal workplace in the late 1890s. We did our first kind of petition to them and made policy recommendations in 1911, right? But we're not giving up. We have helped to close the gap. We've seen that in Idaho. The gap here has closed. It's still not completely done. It's been closing too slowly. In fact, I just saw a stat the other day that said if we just stopped now and did nothing else and let the market take care of itself and everything kind of fix itself in terms of equal pay, we'd have it in Idaho in 2074. So we still need some policy as well as social cultural changes to make that happen. But the reality is we're not giving up on that. The long view, the persistency is part of what I think makes AAUW great. So how else can you be your own best self-advocate? Obviously, I'm a big fan of joining a group. And AAUW, the Boise branch here in particular, is growing by leaps and bounds. We've got lots of good opportunities for folks. But there's also other ways to personally be your own best advocate. How can you do that when you've got a busy life? When you've got family and work and the responsibilities that sometimes really get in the way legitimately of you doing something that you might care very much about. Let me ask you another question, because this might help to motivate you. How many people in this room have ever had a neighbor, or colleague, or friend from church ask you a question that goes something like this? What do you think about XYZ bill? What do you think about a ballot initiative? What do you think about a candidate? Someone who literally said to you, what do you think about this political or policy-based situation? How many people have had people ask them that question? Look how many hands are up. I knew there would be a lot of hands because you're here tonight. Here's where, as a personal advocate, you know that you can make a real difference. Not everybody loves policy and politics. And let's face it, there are absolutely times lately where politics is not something we want to have anything to do with. Right? I mean, I'm coming to you fresh from the nation's capital where they can't legislate their way out of a paper bag. Right? Amen. Thank you, sister. Can I get a witness? So, part of what, let's say this with me, But part of what happens in terms of politics and public policy is that most people really don't pay attention. And it's not being disrespectful. It's not that they don't care about the outcomes. It's not that they don't have opinions. It's literally something they either find distasteful or they find too complicated. But they still know it's important. So what do? And this is well-known political communications theory. They go to people who they like, who they know share their values, who they know pays at least a little bit more attention to this stuff than they do, and they ask your opinion. Literally every time you're asked that question, they're literally asking you how to vote because they want to know, but they don't have time to follow it. So here you are as an advocate with what keep yourself up to date. That is one of your best services to your community, being that person that they know they can go to and ask a question, not feel stupid, and get a sense of where you're at. Now, for those of you who that happens to a lot, you may be thinking to yourself, whoa, that's a lot of pressure all of a sudden. I just thought we were chatting. But the reality is, again, they come to you for a reason, and you pay attention to those issues. So give your opinion, but go one step further. Encourage them to vote. Make sure they really do go to the polls. If they're not registered, I know in Idaho you have the same-day registration, which is great. But encourage them. Even offer them a ride to the polls. Take that one step further so that every time they ask you what's important, you share it and you encourage them to act on it. AUW members are going to be doing this across the country with our voter education program, the It's My Vote program, where we're going to be targeting everybody to get out and vote. We're not going to tell you how to vote, but we want you to vote. But we are going to specifically target young women 18 to 31 who did not vote in 2014. In other words, the drop-off women voters. Drop-off women voters. This can have a huge impact because like so many other presidential elections particularly, women voters are going to decide who the next president is. And they can decide that not just by voting, but also by not voting. We saw the biggest drop-off between 18 and 31-year-olds and women in 2014 that we've seen in 2 decades. What was it that turned them off about the system? What was it that they didn't like? How can we turn that around? We're going to be thinking about that in AAUW and doing a lot of voter registration on college campuses. I have a great story from someone recently who did voter registration. It was in Virginia. And they were very smart. They set up their table right where kind of the long line was for people registering who'd registered late for the winter semester. So there was a long line of folks. And there was one particular AAUW member trying to get this one woman to register for vote. And she was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to wait in line. And she was like, you just waited in line 20 minutes for a sandwich. Nothing like an AAUW member to tell it straight. Did she register to vote? Absolutely. Now we got to make sure she gets to the polls. So this personal advocacy, thinking about not only what you're doing for yourself, but what you're doing for your community. And understanding that when you have friends and family, when you have folks from church or the workplace or the neighbor over the fence saying, what do you think about it? They really want to know. And not being shy about sharing information, resources, and oh, by the way, encouragement for them to be involved as well. Other good things I always like to encourage people to do, and you've heard them before, but I guarantee a lot of you in here haven't done it, so I'm going to still put it out there. Write a letter to the editor. Write a letter to your member of Congress. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. I can tell you AAUW of Idaho made a huge difference recently, 2013, when we were trying to pass the Violence Against Women Act. And that's been a bill. It was a reauthorization of a bill that started in 1994, so it was VAWA 5 in DC, acronym E's. And Mr. Crapo, here from Idaho, was the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. And the tradition has always been with this bipartisan bill that the chair and ranking member of the Judiciary Committees on both the House and Senate side lead the fight to reauthorize this bipartisan bill. It's always been bipartisan. We've never had a problem getting it through because, truly, who is against ending violence against women, right? It's never been a problem. This year, Congress managed to make it a problem. And Mr. Crapo was at the center of some of that storm because he's a conservative member, and a lot of the issues that we were getting, especially from the House side, from the Freedom Caucus, were coming from essentially his compatriots. And one of the things that Idaho was able to do was write letters, do letters to the editor, urging him to stand the course. That there were people back home who appreciated it and were paying attention. We got nice notes from Mr. Crapo's staff about that. It's one of the things you do as a government relations kind of operation like what we have as a lobbyist. I literally will say and said to Mr. Crapo's staff, we can give you some cover. We can get some nice letters written. We can get some information to your office so that you know that there are people who agree with you, who are glad that you're standing up. That's one of the things I always say, red state, purple state, blue state. Write your member of Congress even when you know they're going to disagree with you. Write your member of Congress even when you know they absolutely agree with you. They need to have both the reassurance that they're doing the right thing, if that's in case where you're at with them, or they need to know that not everybody agrees with them. If you don't write, they don't know. And trust me, they will assume. It's one of the things I like about AAUW members. We have at the tables a sign-up sheet if you'd like to be part of our action network. This is our electronic e-advocacy system where you can write a letter to the editor, a note to your member of Congress, and we keep track of that. There's nothing better for me as a lobbyist to go into a particular office about an issue and for them to say to me, oh, we just haven't heard from anybody back in Idaho about this. And I'll look at my numbers and I'll be like, yeah, au contraire. You got so many letters. This is what they said, right? Now, I will tell you, for those of you who wonder with members of Congress, do emails make a difference? Have you ever wondered that? Like, how many hundreds of thousands are they getting? Is this really going to make a difference? It makes a huge difference. Because I'll tell you what, it used to be the gold standard was to handwrite a letter. But then 9/11 happened. Then we had anthrax letters delivered to members of Congress. All of the mail that's supposed to go, the snail mail that's supposed to go to Capitol Hill, starts out at that D.C. mailbox, or that post office, but then it goes back out to Iowa to be irradiated to make sure there's no more anthrax. I have friends who worked on Capitol Hill that were on Cipro, the antibiotic, for 6 months because they were close enough to those letters to be affected. So as a result of that, literally terrorism has made it that they have to pay attention to emails. There's just no point. Because if it takes too long, 2 months for a letter to get to a member of Congress, you could write it today, even to vote 6 weeks out, and it won't get there in time. Things move too fast now, right? So emails really do count. When you get a request from a group that you care about that says, please write your member of Congress, please write your local legislator, please do it. Those numbers add up, and particularly in a state like Idaho, where it's a lower population state, the members of Congress literally keep track of this. You're then in a database. They keep track of phone calls. Literally, members of Congress will walk into the office, and they'll say, how are things running? And what they mean is, how are the calls going? Yays and nays on the issues that are happening right now, and what does the letter pile look like? Now, some members of Congress pay more attention to that than others. Certainly folks that are in tighter races pay more attention to that than others. At the same time, they do all pay attention. So that's a simple thing that you can do that can make a huge difference. Lastly, I wanted to bring up what I think are some great local opportunities here in Idaho. We already mentioned Add the Words. We already mentioned the gender-neutral language. Those are two really great places where you can be helpful. But there's also a really wonderful growing movement looking at early childhood education here in Idaho that is bipartisan in spirit. They just had a great rally this week. The lieutenant governor was there. The business community is behind this because they know if they don't have educated workers, they're not going to be able to make money. It's as simple as that. But Idaho is one of only 5 states that doesn't have state-funded 3 to 4-year-old early childhood education. One of 5. I know you don't want to be, and God bless me for saying this, but you don't want to be keeping company with Alabama and Mississippi. Mississippi has it now, Kathy says, right? So we're better than Mississippi. God bless Mississippi. But the reality is this is something where you can make a difference in a kid's life today. You spend $1 on early childhood education, you're going to save $7 to $13 down the road in welfare, in imprisonment, in crime, in all kinds of things. A kid who learns how to read early and knows how to do that is just going to be a better citizen, period. So this is a place where AAUW, as a leader in that coalition, working together with Idaho NIAC, can do a great job and make a real difference in Idaho kids. And the great thing is, it's not a red issue, it's not a purple issue, it's not Republicans, it's not Democrats. This is an issue that's got some bipartisan support. But there's always going to be the naysayers. And those naysayers need to hear from you. So when you get an action network, hopefully you're signing up on our forums as they go around. When you get an action network from AAUW, send that letter in. Forward it to a few of your best friends and ask them to send that letter in. When you've got this kind of an opportunity, trust me, things aren't as bipartisan as they used to be. So when you have that, you need to take advantage of it. You can make a real difference this year in the lives of Idaho kids. I believe that. So I hope that you will. I hope that you will sign up for AAUW's Action Network and start making a difference with us. If you're not a member of AAUW, you are all, of course, welcome. And then, hey, I'm your personal lobbyist. That's not too bad, right? But let me stop right there and see if there are questions from the audience. I'm sure that there are.
Cards. If you've already written out your cards, and I've seen some people writing them out, hold them up, and someone will
hold up your card. Someone will come get it
and bring them to me.
One other issue I wanted to mention, and I met the young woman who is doing this work. The Idaho state government recently opened a STEM initiative, an agency to help kids be better at science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a huge issue for girls. Girls and people of color are hugely underrepresented. And it's not just a fairness issue, it's about the basics of good product and quality development, right? I mean, we didn't have women at the table when they were inventing airbags. Remember, for a couple of years, we had 5 foot below women being killed by airbags? Airbag itself was a great idea, but they had no women at the table to say, gee, maybe not everybody is 5'6" and above. So it's important that we have all voices at the table. And there is a new agency that has been recommended for a lovely amount of cash, about $14 million. That's another thing that you could be writing your members, your state legislators about, that you like this investment. You've got a high-tech industry here. You need to be able to grow that homegrown talent so that kids have a good education as well as a good job and a reason to stay in Idaho, a reason to stay right here. So where is that young person? I know I saw her. Maybe she had to run out. Yeah, Angela Hemingway. And so if you're interested, take a look at that. It is one of AAUW's key priorities because we know it's not just a matter of fairness and simple justice. Of course it is, but it's also about a 21st century economy. It's also about the United States remaining competitive in a global marketplace. It's about homeland security and defense. It's about being able to produce and design our own stuff. We got to have good folks in STEM to be able to do that. Okay.
Okay, the first question is, what do you say to the person who says they're undecided or independent?
Okay, well, independence is always good, actually. You know, if you think about it when we're talking about the elections, particularly the presidentials, but it's that mushy middle that makes the decision. It's part of the reason why there's such a big gender gap in voting, because women tend to be that mushier middle. They tend to vote based on candidate, not on party. So being independent in and of itself can be a fine thing. That in and of itself is great. If someone says I'm undecided, then I think the best thing you can do is point them to resources. So AAUW, for instance, has a variety of different resources. We have just released this week a congressional voting record. So you can see how your members of Congress voted on issues that we care about, like K through 12 education and the reauthorization and jettisoning of No Child Left Behind, or equal pay, or campus sexual assault. So having a sense of where you might send them, even if it's just as simple as the AAUW website or the League of Women Voters website, where we have good nonpartisan information that people can take advantage of to make their decision. The biggest thing is, though, is you want to say, just because you're undecided doesn't mean you shouldn't vote. I don't care if you go in there and you make the decision right then, but undecided doesn't absolve you of that responsibility. In fact, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain.
We have several questions here about tactics. And the first one of those is, how about multiple form letters? Do they really work? Do you need to customize?
Multiple form letters. They can work, but one of the things we do with our email system is we have kind of the boilerplate, but we always leave space in the beginning for you to tell why you care about that issue, for you to share a personal story or to give them an update. Part of the reason why that's important is because a politician can tell how invested you are, how persistent you're going to be based on how important the issue is to you. So if I'm someone who I feel has been discriminated against based on pay, and I say that in my letter, that I want better equal pay laws because it happened to me and I don't want it to happen to somebody else, that's absolutely a flag for that member of Congress or whoever you sent it to, that this is a personal thing. You're not going to go away until it's solved. Versus something that maybe you don't feel as strongly about, where you send a letter but you don't personalize because you don't have your own story. Think about it. It's just how you kind of feel about it one way or the other. So I think that's important. The other thing with tactics that I would tell you, and this is very important too, and I want you all to hear this, sometimes you're obviously not going to get them to change their vote, right? But the thing you need to know about how politics works on the state, local, and national level is an awful lot of work is done behind the scenes. So were we able to change Mr. Rish's vote, who was against the VAWA bill? No. But by hearing from AAUW Idaho members what that meant, we found out later, was that he stood up in a caucus meeting and said, we need to just let this bill go through. We didn't change his vote, but we still made him a proponent of allowing an up or down vote, of not filibustering the bill. So again, all those times that you think, I shouldn't say anything, they're not going to agree with me, they don't read it anyway, you just never know when your one message, your one note will make the difference. Actually, the only time you know is that if you don't send it, it won't be your note that makes the difference, right? So thinking about not just the issue specifically, but also the fact that they have ways that they caucus, that they lobby each other. And you can make a huge difference. Our members in Utah just did this. We were trying to get just a little tiny commission to decide whether maybe we should have a National Women's History Museum on the National Mall. It wasn't actually a vote on the mall, on the building. It was literally just an idea. It was a vote for a commission to think about it. We were having a hard time getting that through. There were some folks who felt that it was going to be kind of an inappropriate lesson about women in America. And one of those problems was Mr. Lee in Utah. Mr. Lee in Utah was one of the ones who actually put a hold on the bill. He was so opposed to it. So what did we do? We went to our ladies in Utah and we said, look, we need to talk to Mr. Lee. And this is why AAUW being nonpartisan and having Republican and Democratic and independent members helps, because we had members in Utah who knew Mr. Lee, who had donated to his campaign, and went to him and said, why are you holding this up? It's just a little commission, right? So what happened? After lots of very kind of quiet, on the down low pressure from AAUW members, he removed his hold. He didn't change his vote. He still voted no. But he stopped the filibuster so that everybody else, and it was like everybody else, 97 other people, voted yes, right? So the way you think about advocacy isn't just voting for something or against something. Sometimes it's how they can contribute to the process. Sometimes it's making something less bad, right? Yeah.
Here's another tactics question. Remind me, what is the effect of a signature on an online petition?
The effect on members of Congress? Okay, I'm going to tell you something you may or may not want to hear about online petitions. When you're asked to sign an online petition, make sure you trust the source. Because in this age of social media and email and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else, there are literally companies out there that are making money creating petitions. And what they do is they come to groups, sometimes like AUW, and they'll literally say, if you do a petition on XYZ, we'll put it up on our site, and for the lovely rate of $3 a name or whatever it might be, we will give you those names. And they think it's gold to the group because you already know they're interested in that issue or they wouldn't have signed the petition. Here's the key. That in and of itself isn't a bad thing because it could still be a great petition that's going to a member of Congress. Why you have to trust the source is to make sure that they're literally going to convert those names, right? So we just did a petition recently because we were unhappy about Carly Fiorina being left out of the debate. Not because we supported Carly Fiorina one way or the other, we don't endorse. But we thought it was awfully strange that in 2012, after the Iowa caucuses, ABC had everybody up on the stage, and this time, after the Iowa caucuses, they decided not only not to have this one person who happens to be a woman, but they also weren't going to have an undercard debate. So they kind of changed the rules on her. But the key was, with that petition for us, was we had to get it to ABC. So the thing you want to know when you're signing those things, when you're essentially giving some of yourself, which is your email address, because that's just what you've done, is are they going to use it the way they say they have? Probably you're also going to get other emails from them. That could be good or bad. You can unsubscribe if you don't like it. But make sure that they're truly going to send that petition to the target, because that's what you want. That's what you were willing to give up something for, your email address. And so making sure of that is always key.
And one more tactics question. Does it make a difference if you send legislators an email from the state website or from your own personal account?
Oh, that's interesting. So the state website or your own personal account. The state website oftentimes will feed into a data gathering system. So they like things that come through the state system because it folds nicely into whatever kind of data processing they have, so that they can keep track of not only that you wrote the letter, but what issues you care about. So they'll literally check off, wrote me about veterans, wrote me about Social Security, wrote me about equal pay, wrote me about small businesses. And then what happens is you sometimes will get specific newsletters, both from local reps and federal members of Congress, that literally say, we know you like veterans issues, here's a newsletter about all the great things I've done for veterans, right? So going through the state system is good in the sense that it puts you into that system right away and you can get some feedback from it. If you do it through your own email account, it's not bad, but it does create more work for the staff because that means they have to manually enter. Now, here's the thing. If you really want them to make sure that they've read every single thing, send it via personal email, because they're not going to be able to just use like a word source or something to categorize it. They're going to have to read it, and they're going to have to put in your name and your email address. It's not just going to be folded in for them. So I say when it's an issue that you care about, but it's not the biggest deal, help the staffer out. They're overworked. They got a lot of stuff to do. But when it's one where you've really got a personal story and it's real immediate and you want to make sure that they see you and remember your name, send your personal email.
Okay, an issue question. And this one starts out, STEM is great. But what I have heard from young women who have computer science degrees and went to work in the field is that in the workplace they experienced harassment. Some left, went back to school for a graduate degree in another field. Yeah. What's being done in the workplace to change attitudes towards women?
Yeah, it's very true. We're seeing a lot of the conversation about STEM right now and a recognition of kind of the harassment that has been endemic in that particular field, largely because it is male-dominated. But we know that harassment happens throughout the workplace. Part of the reason why we're seeing more reports of that in STEM now is because there has been such a focus, right? I mean, the president, there are bills in Congress, understand that the United States is behind in terms of STEM, and we've got to do something about it. That is a matter of national security and economic security. So as a result, there are these programs. AAUW has wonderful programs where we do STEM camps for girls to get them interested. But you're right, there's this leaky pipeline. so that even if you can get them interested when they're in middle school and high school and keep them kind of on that curriculum, there can be problems both in academia as they're studying, in terms of lack of mentors, in terms of some gender bias, essentially, implicit gender bias that happens. And then once they get those jobs, there's absolutely still a pay gap. You're going to make more if you're an engineer than if you're a cosmetologist, but you're still going to make less than a male engineer. I mean, we've crunched the numbers. We've done the math. Girls can't do math. We've done the numbers. And the reality is, even when you compare an apples-to-apples job, 1 year out of school, same major, same field, same occupation, working the same number of hours, there's already a 7% gap. 1 year out of college. And that more than doubles when you get to 10 years out, even though women are more likely to get a master's degree. So what we see in the STEM fields, as well as some other fields, is that there's a lot of work that goes into it, obviously, but the reward doesn't come out for them. And at least not enough to balance some of the frustrations and the pressures that they feel. Not a lot of support in terms of work-life balance. And let's be real clear, work-life balance isn't just for women, it's for men too. It's for men too. It's part of why, when they passed the Family and Medical Leave Act, one of the purposes of the bill was to make it more supported for men to take time off to be with their kids, for men to have that experience. Because part of it was not only because it's a good thing to do, but also because if you remove that stereotype, that's going to help women in the workplace about the assumptions that are made, the stereotypical biases that come into play and impact women in the workplace. So there are several things, obviously, that folks who are in those situations can do. They can talk to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But the reality is, when we know it's happening in the workplace, in these areas at such endemic levels, we have to be able to have a more public response. It's very much like equal pay. And we can't afford to have that leaky pipeline where women are going into these fields, people of color are going into these fields, and they're dropping out because it's just a hostile place for them to be. Silicon Valley is starting to police itself. A lot of these groups have started to do their own internal surveys, looking at their gender pay gaps, looking at their gender gaps in leadership, looking at reports of sexual harassment. And they have not liked what they've seen. And they're trying to do, I think, something about it. But the reality is, part of this is because of the pressure, because of the spotlight. Folks like AAUW, what this new office in Idaho is going to be doing is putting that spotlight to say, we can't accept this. If this is keeping women out, we have to fix it because we need to make sure everyone's at the table. All right.
Last question. This is about early childhood education. The question is, please describe the primary goal of early education. Is it academics or is it play and socialization?
It's both. You know, you really want to be able to support what's going on in the home. You want to make sure that kids are socialized into kind of a learning environment, but you also want to start them on the road to a good education. And that means fundamentals. That means basics. That's critically important when you don't have kids starting at that at an early age. And I know here you don't necessarily even have kindergarten everywhere. It fundamentally has them be behind the 8 ball right from the get-go. The other thing that it does, particularly for, it's good for all kids and should be something for all kids. But we do know, based on Head Start research, which was, by the way, an AAW idea, based off a paper that AAW members wrote, but we know from Head Start research that particularly for families in lower socioeconomic classes, that is also something really important for them to get off on the right foot and have that educational experience that's so critical to their own economic self-sufficiency. So, well, you all have been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming tonight and for your support. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. We have a lot more that I'm going to be doing here in Idaho, so I'm looking forward to it. But you all have been great. Thank you.